He called me Megan for the first 2 months, even though my name is Melissa. When he fired me, he thought he'd just kicked aside a disposable pawn. But he had no idea I was the one holding the keys to Apex Corp's heart, and that heart was about to stop beating along with his company. My name is Melissa Porter, and I am 38 years old. For 12 years, I was the ghost in Apex Corp's machine, the network administrator and security specialist who kept every byte of customer data flowing through their servers like blood through veins. I was invisible to most people, which suited me fine. Invisibility has its advantages when you're planning the perfect revenge. Apex Corp marketed itself as a cutting-edge B2B data management solutions provider. Their website featured glossy photos of diverse employees smiling in open-concept workspaces, holding tablets and pointing at holographic charts that probably cost more than my annual salary to produce. The reality was different. Walking into their downtown Seattle office felt like stepping into a hollow movie set, all surface shine with structural rot underneath. The lobby impressed visitors with its floor-to-ceiling windows, living moss walls, and that ridiculous kinetic sculpture that moved like a metallic octopus having a seizure. But climb to the third floor where the real work happened, and you'd find servers held together with duct tape, workstations running on Windows 7, and a coffee machine that got more maintenance attention than our backup systems. I'd built my career in the shadows of places like this. While executives practiced their TED Talks about synergistic paradigm shifts and disruptive innovation ecosystems, I was the one who actually made their technology work. I spoke fluent database query, could debug network protocols in my sleep, and had personally architected the client command core that formed the backbone of Apex's entire operation. The client command core wasn't just a customer relationship management system. It was 15 years of accumulated intelligence. Every interaction, every preference, every purchasing pattern, every contract negotiation detail, every personal note about a client's kids or golf handicap. I'd spent over a decade feeding this digital organism, watching it grow from a simple contact database into something that could predict customer behavior with uncanny accuracy. Tristan Ward was everything I wasn't. Where I was methodical, he was impulsive. Where I was invisible, he commanded attention. Where I delivered results, he delivered presentations about future results. At 42, he had the kind of effortless charisma that made investors write checks and employees believe in impossible deadlines. His corner office showcased awards for innovation in enterprise solutions and leadership excellence, though I'd never seen him innovate anything except new ways to take credit for other people's work. Tristan had joined Apex as CEO 3 years ago, brought in by the board to modernize our competitive positioning. He spoke in corporate buzzwords with the confidence of someone who'd never had to debug a crashed server at 3 a.m. or explain to an angry client why their data migration failed. He wore expensive suits that probably cost more than I made in a month, drove a Tesla that he parked in the spot closest to the building, and had the kind of smile that made you check your wallet afterward. The first sign of trouble came during a company-wide meeting in the main conference room. Tristan stood at the head of the table, gesturing at a PowerPoint slide titled, Operational Excellence Through Human Capital Optimization. The slide contained a single bullet point, right-sizing our workforce for maximum agility. I knew what that meant. In corporate speak, right-sizing was like downsizing, but with more syllables to make it sound strategic instead of cruel. Human capital optimization meant they were going to fire people and call it an upgrade. I'd seen this dance before at other companies, the preliminary budget reviews, the hushed conversations between department heads, the way HR suddenly became very interested in updating employee handbooks. But I wasn't particularly worried. I was essential. I was the only person who fully understood the client command core's architecture. I'd written most of the custom queries that generated their quarterly reports. I maintained the security protocols that kept their data safe from hackers. I was the institutional memory that no amount of documentation could replace. My confidence lasted until Tristan announced his breakthrough innovation, a new integrated customer platform called Synergy Mesh. According to his presentation, it would revolutionize how Apex managed client relationships by creating seamless cross-platform data synthesis with predictive analytics capabilities. The slides were beautiful, full of curved arrows and gradient boxes that somehow made the concept look both futuristic and trustworthy. The reality was more complicated. Synergy Mesh was essentially a fancy dashboard that would sit on top of our existing systems, pulling data from multiple sources and presenting it in a more visually appealing format. It wasn't revolutionary. It was cosmetic surgery for our database. But Tristan had already promised it to our biggest clients, scheduled demonstrations, and committed to a delivery timeline that would have been ambitious for a team of 20 developers working around the clock. I tried to warn him. I scheduled a meeting, prepared a detailed technical assessment, and explained why rushing the integration would be like performing open-heart surgery with a butter knife. Synergy Mesh needed at least 6 months of testing to ensure it wouldn't corrupt our existing data or create security vulnerabilities. We needed to migrate carefully, verify data integrity at each step, and have rollback procedures in place. Tristan listened to my concerns with the kind of patient smile you'd give a child explaining why they can't have ice cream for breakfast. "Melissa," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I appreciate your attention to detail, but sometimes we need to trust the process and embrace a little calculated risk. Our clients are expecting innovation, not excuses." He'd gotten my name right that time, which should have been encouraging. Instead, it felt ominous. Like he was finally paying attention to me, but not in a good way. The demo was scheduled for a Thursday morning with representatives from Consolidated Dynamics, one of our largest clients. They'd been with Apex for 8 years, generating nearly $2 million in annual revenue. Their account manager, Janet, had been nervous about the demo for weeks. She kept stopping by my desk, asking if I was absolutely certain the system would work flawlessly. I wasn't certain of anything. The integration was still buggy. The data synchronization was inconsistent, and we hadn't had time to test the system under real-world conditions. But Tristan was confident, and in the corporate world, confidence often mattered more than competence. The demo started well enough. Tristan wore his best suit and his most persuasive smile. He guided the Consolidated Dynamics team through Synergy Mesh's interface, highlighting features that would transform their operational efficiency and unlock hidden value in their customer relationships. The system responded smoothly to his carefully rehearsed clicks and queries. Then he decided to improvise. "Let me show you something really exciting," Tristan said, navigating to a section we hadn't tested thoroughly. "Watch how Synergy Mesh can predict customer behavior patterns." He clicked on a drop-down menu that should have displayed Consolidated Dynamics customer segments. Instead, the screen filled with raw database code. Error messages cascaded across the display like a digital waterfall. The system had tried to execute a query that didn't exist, crashed into a missing table, and then attempted to recover by displaying the underlying SQL commands. It was like watching someone's brain dump its contents onto the floor. The silence in the conference room was deafening. 6 executives from Consolidated Dynamics stared at the screen, their expressions shifting from confusion to concern to something approaching disgust. Janet's face went pale. Even Tristan's perpetual smile flickered. "That's unusual," he said, clicking frantically to close the error messages. "Let me just refresh this and we'll try again." But refreshing didn't help. The system was stuck in a loop, alternating between error messages and timeout warnings. The more Tristan clicked, the worse it got. Finally, he closed the browser and suggested they continue the demonstration on our backup system, which didn't exist. The Consolidated Dynamics team left without signing anything. They were polite but distant, making vague promises about reviewing the proposal and getting back to us soon. Janet walked them to the elevator with the kind of forced enthusiasm that fooled no one. I spent the rest of the day fixing the system, identifying the queries that had failed, and patching the integration errors that should have been caught weeks earlier. It was tedious work, but I'd done it countless times before. Broken systems were just puzzles waiting to be solved. What I didn't expect was for Tristan to call me into his office the next morning. His corner office was a shrine to corporate success. The walls displayed his MBA from Wharton, his certificate from a leadership program at Harvard Business School, and framed photos of him shaking hands with people I didn't recognize but who looked important. Behind his desk hung a motivational poster with a mountain climber and the words, "Leadership Unleashed" in bold letters. "Melissa," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit down." I sat, noting the way he'd positioned himself with the morning sun behind him, creating a natural backlight that made his features hard to read. It was a power play, but a subtle one. Everything about Tristan was calculated, from his posture to his tone of voice. "I want to talk about yesterday," he said, clasping his hands on the desk. "The demo with consolidated dynamics." "When I can explain what went wrong," I said. "The system tried to execute a query that referenced a table that doesn't exist in the production environment. It's a simple fix, but it highlights why we needed more testing time." Tristan nodded, but I could tell he wasn't really listening. He was rehearsing his next lines, the way actors run through their blocking before a scene. "I appreciate your technical expertise," he said, "but I'm concerned about the bigger picture. Our clients need to trust us. They need to believe that we can deliver on our promises. When systems fail during critical demonstrations, it undermines that trust." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. This conversation wasn't about the technical problems. It was about finding someone to blame. "The system failed because it wasn't ready for production," I said. "I recommended delaying the demo until we could properly test the integration." "Yes, you did," Tristan agreed. "But sometimes leadership means making difficult decisions based on incomplete information. We can't let perfect be the enemy of good." He paused, reaching for his coffee mug. It was one of those expensive ceramic pieces that probably came from a boutique coffee shop, the kind of mug that cost $30 and made regular coffee taste sophisticated. He took a sip, set it down precisely on his desk, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Melissa, I've been thinking about our team structure and how we can optimize our human resources for maximum impact. The board has asked me to evaluate all our operational departments and identify areas where we can increase efficiency." The words hit me like cold water. Efficiency was another corporate euphemism, like right-sizing and optimization. It meant they were going to fire people and call it an improvement. "I want you to know that this isn't personal," Tristan continued. "You're a talented individual with valuable skills. But Apex is evolving, and we need to ensure that our team composition aligns with our strategic vision." I sat perfectly still, watching him perform this script he'd probably rehearsed in the mirror. He was firing me, but he couldn't even say it directly. He had to wrap it in corporate jargon and false empathy, like putting poison in a gift box. "We've decided to restructure the IT department to increase agility and reduce operational overhead. Your position is being eliminated as part of this realignment. We'll provide you with a generous severance package and positive references for your job search." The words seemed to come from far away, like I was hearing them through water. 12 years of my life, dismissed with a paragraph of buzzwords. I thought about all the weekends I'd spent in the office, all the midnight calls when systems crashed, all the problems I'd solved that kept this company running. None of it mattered now. "When?" I asked. "Today will be your last day. HR will handle the paperwork and help you transition your responsibilities. We appreciate everything you've done for Apex, and we wish you the best in your future endeavors." He stood up, extending his hand for a shake. The gesture was so absurd that I almost laughed. He was firing me and then offering a handshake, like we were concluding a successful business meeting. I stood but didn't take his hand. "I'll need to transfer my access credentials and document the systems," I said. "Of course, Janet from HR will coordinate with you on the technical transition. We want to make sure this process is as smooth as possible for everyone involved." I walked out of his office feeling numb. The bullpen of cubicles seemed different now, like I was seeing it through glass. My coworkers glanced at me with the mixture of curiosity and pity that always accompanied these meetings. They knew what had happened without being told. In corporate environments, bad news traveled faster than good news. I returned to my desk and began the ritual of clearing out 12 years of accumulated work life. personal photos went into a box, along with the coffee mug my sister had given me and the small succulent plant that had somehow survived in the fluorescent lighting. I deleted personal files from my computer and logged out of personal accounts. But as I went through the motions of departure, something shifted inside me. The numbness was replaced by a cold, calculating anger. Not the hot rage that makes you say things you regret, but the kind of methodical fury that plans and waits and strikes with precision. I looked around the office and realized that Tristan had made a critical error. He'd assumed that firing me would solve his problems, but he didn't understand what I actually did here. I wasn't just a network administrator who kept the servers running. I was the institutional memory of this company. I was the one who understood how all the systems connected, how the data flowed, and most importantly, how it could all be disrupted. The client command core wasn't just a database I maintained. It was a system I designed and built from the ground up. I knew every table, every relationship, every vulnerability. I'd created the backup procedures, the security protocols, and the disaster recovery plans. I was the only person who truly understood how Apex's digital nervous system worked. And Tristan had just fired me. I spent the rest of the morning going through the official transition process with Janet from HR. She was a kind woman in her 50s who'd been with the company for almost as long as I had. She walked me through the severance paperwork, the COBRA benefits, and the non-disclosure agreements that I was expected to sign. "I'm really sorry about this, Melissa," she said as we reviewed the documents. "I know this is difficult." "It's business," I replied, signing my name with careful precision. "I understand." But I didn't understand. I understood exactly what was happening, and I was already planning my response. The genius of my situation was that Tristan had created the perfect conditions for his own destruction. He'd fired the one person who could have prevented what I was about to do. And he'd done it in a way that left me with nothing to lose. I had no loyalty to protect, no future at the company to preserve, and no reason to care about the consequences. While Janet processed my paperwork, I made one final trip to my workstation. I told her I needed to collect some personal files and make sure my replacement could access the systems. It was a reasonable request, the kind of thing a responsible employee would do during a transition. What I actually did was plug in a device I'd been carrying in my laptop bag for the past 3 years, a black key drive that I'd acquired at a DEF CON hacker conference. It looked like an ordinary USB drive, but it was actually a military-grade solid-state device designed for data exfiltration. I'd never used it for anything illegal, but I'd kept it as a kind of insurance policy, a reminder that I had options if my career ever took an unexpected turn. The black key drive was running a custom script I'd written called Archangel. It was designed to create a complete backup of the client command core, including all the metadata, relationships, and historical data that made the system valuable. The script worked by mimicking normal database maintenance operations, so it wouldn't trigger any security alerts or leave obvious traces in the system logs. I watched the progress bar creep across my screen, feeling my heart rate increase with each percentage point. This was the moment of no return. Once I copied that data, I would be committing a federal crime. Corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, violation of computer fraud laws. The charges would be serious and the penalty severe. But I was past caring about consequences. Tristan had already destroyed my career and my financial security. He'd humiliated me in front of my colleagues and dismissed 12 years of dedication like it was nothing. If I was going down, I was taking him with me. The Archangel script completed its work in 18 minutes. 15 years of customer data, compressed and encrypted, now existed on a device smaller than a pack of gum. I ejected the drive, slipped it into my pocket, and began the final phase of my plan. I needed to cover my tracks, but not in the way most people would expect. Instead of trying to hide what I'd done, I was going to make it impossible to prove I'd done it. I opened a command prompt and began executing a series of automated maintenance scripts that would clean up temporary files, compress old log data, and optimize database performance. These were routine operations that I performed every month, but they would also erase any evidence of the Archangel script's activity. The beauty of this approach was that it would look like I was being responsible during my transition. I was cleaning up the systems, making sure they were running efficiently for my replacement. No one would question why I was performing routine maintenance on my last day. I spent another hour documenting system passwords, server configurations, and maintenance procedures. I created detailed notes about upcoming security patches, scheduled maintenance windows, and potential system vulnerabilities. I was being the model employee, ensuring a smooth transition for whoever would take over my responsibilities. What I didn't document was how to recover from the kind of systematic customer data loss that was about to occur. By lunchtime, I'd completed my official transition duties. I'd signed all the paperwork, transferred my access credentials, and provided detailed notes about the systems I'd maintained. Janet walked me to the elevator, making small talk about my plans and offering to provide references for my job search. "You're being very professional about this," she said as we waited for the elevator. "I know this can't be easy." "I learned a long time ago that you can't control what happens to you," I replied. "You can only control how you respond." The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. As they closed, I caught a glimpse of the office bullpen where I'd spent so many years. My former coworkers were already moving on, focusing on their own work and their own survival. In a week, they'd barely remember I'd been there, but they would remember what happened next. I drove home to my apartment in Belltown, a modest one-bedroom place with a view of the construction cranes that were slowly transforming Seattle's skyline. I'd lived there for 5 years, paying rent that consumed nearly half my income and watching the neighborhood gentrification price out the local businesses I'd grown to love. The apartment wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was where I did my best thinking. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the Black Key Drive, weighing my options. I could return the data and pretend none of this had happened. I could look for another job and try to rebuild my career. I could be the bigger person and move on with my life. Or I could destroy Tristan Ward and everything he'd built. The decision should have been difficult, but it wasn't. I'd spent 12 years watching mediocre executives take credit for my work, promise features that couldn't be delivered, and treat employees like disposable resources. I'd been the invisible person who made their success possible. And I'd been rewarded with condescension and unemployment. I was tired of being invisible. It was time to become a ghost. I spent the evening researching Apex's competitors, looking for companies that might be interested in acquiring detailed customer intelligence. The obvious choice was Catalyst Partners, a Boston-based firm that had been trying to break into the Pacific Northwest market for years. They offered similar services to Apex but had struggled to gain traction against established players. Catalyst was run by Miranda Doyle, a woman in her early 50s who'd built her company through a combination of technical expertise and aggressive business development. She'd worked at IBM and Oracle before starting her own firm, and she had a reputation for playing hardball in competitive situations. If anyone would appreciate the value of what I was offering, it would be her, but I couldn't approach Catalyst directly. That would leave too many traces, too many connections that could be traced back to me. I needed to create a layer of anonymity, a digital persona that could negotiate on my behalf without revealing my identity. I spent the night setting up a complex web of virtual private networks, encrypted email accounts, and digital currencies. I created an identity called Shadow Mercury, a pseudonym that suggested both stealth and volatility. I registered accounts on secure messaging platforms, established cryptocurrency wallets, and created communication channels that would be nearly impossible to trace. By morning, I was ready to make contact. My first message to Catalyst Partners was simple and direct. "I have information about Apex Corp's customer relationships that might interest you. If you're serious about expanding your market share in the Pacific Northwest, we should talk." I didn't expect an immediate response. Corporate executives don't usually engage with anonymous contacts making vague offers about competitor intelligence, but I'd included just enough specific information to get their attention, details about Apex's customer retention rates, and revenue projections that weren't publicly available. The response came within 6 hours. "Your message has been forwarded to our business development team. We're interested in learning more about your proposal. Please provide additional information about the scope and nature of the intelligence you're offering. I smiled, reading the carefully worded reply. They were interested, but they were also cautious. They wanted to know what I was selling before they committed to buying. It was a reasonable approach, but it also meant I had their attention. My second message was more detailed. I described the Client Command Core's capabilities, the depth of customer data it contained, and the competitive advantages it could provide. I explained how Apex's customer relationships were built on personal connections and historical knowledge that would be difficult to replicate without inside information. I also included a sample, a detailed profile of Tyburn Group, one of Apex's mid-tier clients. The profile contained information about their purchasing patterns, budget cycles, decision-making processes, and key personnel. It was the kind of intelligence that could give a competitor a significant advantage in pursuing the account. The sample was carefully chosen. Tyburn Group had been expressing dissatisfaction with Apex's service quality, and their contract was up for renewal in 6 months. They were exactly the kind of client that might be persuaded to switch providers if approached correctly. Catalyst's response was immediate and enthusiastic. This is exactly the kind of market intelligence we've been looking for. We're prepared to enter into a consulting arrangement with very generous compensation. When can we schedule a more detailed discussion? I had them hooked. Now I needed to set the terms of engagement. I proposed a simple arrangement. I would provide detailed intelligence about specific Apex customers in exchange for a consulting fee paid in cryptocurrency. The information would be delivered through secure channels, and all communications would remain anonymous. Catalyst would use the intelligence to pursue competitive opportunities, but they would not reveal the source of their information. It was an elegant solution. Catalyst would gain a significant competitive advantage. I would be compensated for my expertise, and Apex would slowly lose customers without understanding why. The beauty of the arrangement was that it would look like normal market competition. Customers would switch providers for better service, more competitive pricing, or more attractive terms. There would be no obvious connection to corporate espionage or data theft. Within a week, I had my first assignment. Catalyst wanted detailed information about Meridian Industries, a manufacturing company that generated over $800,000 in annual revenue for Apex. They were particularly interested in understanding Meridian's satisfaction with their current service level and their openness to alternative providers. I provided everything they needed: contact information for key decision makers, details about Meridian's current contract terms, documentation of service issues they'd experienced, and insights into their future technology needs. I also included personal information about the executives involved, their communication preferences, their decision-making styles, and their professional backgrounds. Armed with this intelligence, Catalyst crafted a targeted approach to Meridian. They knew exactly what problems to highlight, which benefits to emphasize, and how to position their services as solutions to specific pain points. They knew when Meridian's contract was up for renewal, who had budget authority, and what kind of proposal would be most attractive. The approach worked perfectly. Within 3 weeks, Meridian had signed a 2-year contract with Catalyst, generating over $1.2 million in revenue. They'd not only stolen Apex's customer, they'd done it at a higher price point by offering services that directly addressed Meridian's stated needs. At Apex, the loss of Meridian created confusion and concern. Tristan called an emergency meeting to discuss customer retention strategies and competitive intelligence gathering. He brought in a consultant to analyze their sales process and identify areas for improvement. He instituted new customer service protocols and increased the frequency of account reviews. But he couldn't fix the real problem, because he didn't understand what the real problem was. I watched the situation unfold from my apartment, monitoring industry news and social media for information about Apex's declining performance. I'd maintained connections with several former colleagues who kept me informed about internal developments. They complained about increased pressure from management, confusion about customer defections, and concern about job security. The information I provided to Catalyst became more sophisticated over time. I analyzed customer behavioral patterns, identified accounts that were vulnerable to competitive pressure, and developed profiles of potential defectors. I created detailed targeting strategies that allowed Catalyst to approach customers with surgical precision. Each successful customer acquisition generated significant revenue for Catalyst and a corresponding loss for Apex. But more importantly, each defection damaged Apex's reputation and market position. Customers who switched providers often shared their experiences with peers, creating a cascade effect that undermined confidence in Apex's abilities. Tristan began to panic. He hired a series of consultants to analyze the situation, spending thousands of dollars on competitive intelligence reports and customer satisfaction surveys. He reorganized the sales team, changed compensation structures, and implemented new customer retention programs. Nothing worked. The problem wasn't with Apex's sales process or customer service. The problem was that their competitors had access to inside information that allowed them to outmaneuver them at every turn. They knew which customers were dissatisfied, what problems needed to be solved, and how to position their services for maximum impact. Tristan never suspected that the problem originated with a fired employee who'd taken the customer database with her. He assumed that the customer defections were the result of normal competitive pressure, market changes, or internal operational issues. He kept looking for solutions within the company, never realizing that the threat was external. I received regular updates about the situation through my network of former colleagues. The most reliable source was Craig Morrison, a sales manager who'd been with Apex for 8 years. Craig had always been friendly to me, and he'd been one of the few people who'd expressed genuine regret about my termination. According to Craig, morale at Apex was deteriorating rapidly. The sales team was struggling to meet targets, customer service was overwhelmed with complaints, and executives were engaged in increasingly desperate brainstorming sessions. Tristan had become erratic and defensive, alternating between grand strategic pronouncements and paranoid accusations about employee loyalty. He's convinced that someone is leaking information to competitors. Craig told me during a coffee meeting. He's been interviewing employees, reviewing email accounts, and monitoring phone calls. The whole place feels like a police state. I expressed sympathy for the situation while carefully avoiding any indication that I knew more than I should. Craig assumed that I was just another former employee who'd been treated badly, and he appreciated having someone to vent to about the company's problems. The crazy thing is, Craig continued, our service quality hasn't changed. We're still providing the same level of support, using the same systems, following the same processes, but somehow our competitors always seem to know exactly what to say to steal our customers. I nodded understandingly, making appropriate sounds of sympathy and concern. Craig had no idea that he was describing the exact outcome I'd been working to achieve. The situation escalated when Tristan decided to contact me directly. He called my cell phone on a Thursday evening, 3 months after my termination. I recognized his number and let it go to voicemail, but he called back immediately. On the third attempt, I answered. Melissa, he said, his voice tight with stress. I'm glad I caught you. I hope you're doing well. I'm fine. Tristan, what can I do for you? I wanted to talk to you about something. We've been experiencing some unusual competitive pressure lately, and I'm trying to understand what might be causing it. I was hoping you might have some insights. I paused, choosing my words carefully. What kind of insights are you looking for? Well, you know our systems better than anyone. Is there any way that sensitive customer information could be getting to our competitors? Any security vulnerabilities that might have been exploited? The question was both amusing and insulting. He was asking me to help him solve a problem that I'd created, and he was doing it in a way that suggested he suspected me without actually accusing me of anything. Security vulnerabilities are always possible, I said, but I'm not sure I'm the right person to help you with this. After all, you fired me because you thought I was a liability. That's not... Look, Melissa, I know the termination was difficult, but I need you to understand that it wasn't personal. We had to make some hard decisions about resource allocation. Resource allocation, I repeated neutrally. Is that what you're calling it now? I'm calling it business, and right now, I need to focus on protecting the business. If you know of any security issues that might be affecting our customer data, I'd appreciate your help. I let the silence stretch for a moment, allowing him to interpret it however he wanted. Then I spoke in the same calm, professional tone I'd used in countless technical meetings over the years. Tristan, if I were you, I'd be less worried about external security threats and more concerned about internal operational issues. Sometimes the biggest vulnerabilities aren't technical, they're cultural. What do you mean? I mean that when you fire the people who built your systems, you create knowledge gaps that can be exploited. When you prioritize presentation over functionality, you create weaknesses that competitors can identify and exploit. When you treat employees like disposable resources, you create conditions where loyalty becomes optional. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge of desperation. Are you saying that a former employee might be sharing confidential information? I'm saying that you might want to consider the possibility that your problems are self-inflicted. You've created an environment where people don't feel valued or protected. In that kind of environment, bad things can happen. Melissa, if you know something specific, I need you to tell me. The company is in serious trouble. We could lose everything. The company was already in trouble, I replied. You just didn't realize it because you were too busy managing presentations to notice what was actually happening. I hung up without saying goodbye, leaving him to contemplate the implications of our conversation. He would spend the next several days analyzing every word, looking for hidden meanings and veiled threats. He would wonder if I was involved in his problems, but he wouldn't be able to prove anything. The paranoia would eat at him, making him less effective and more erratic. He would start seeing enemies everywhere, questioning the loyalty of employees who had nothing to do with his situation. He would make increasingly desperate decisions that would only accelerate his company's decline. 3 days later, Craig called to tell me that Tristan had instituted mandatory lie detector tests for all employees with access to customer data. The tests were administered by a private security firm and focused on questions about competitive intelligence and information sharing. The entire process was voluntary, but employees who declined to participate were placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. It's insane, Craig said. Half the sales team is threatening to quit. The other half is convinced that someone is going to get fired for failing the polygraph. Morale is completely shot. The lie detector tests were a strategic mistake that revealed the depth of Tristan's panic. Polygraph examinations are notoriously unreliable and legally questionable, especially when used for employment decisions. More importantly, they created an atmosphere of mistrust and fear that was counterproductive to business operations. Several employees did quit, including 2 senior account managers who had been with the company for years. Their departures created additional instability and sent a clear message to remaining staff that the company was in serious trouble. Word of the polygraph tests leaked to industry publications, creating negative publicity that further damaged Apex's reputation. While Tristan was destroying his company from within, I was providing Catalyst with increasingly sophisticated intelligence about customer vulnerabilities and competitive opportunities. My analysis had evolved from simple customer profiles to complex strategic assessments that identified market trends, competitive weaknesses, and growth opportunities. Catalyst's success in the Pacific Northwest market had been dramatic. They'd acquired 12 major customers from Apex, generated over $8 million in new revenue, and established a reputation as the region's premier data management provider. Their aggressive growth had attracted attention from investors and industry analysts, positioning them for potential acquisition or public offering. Miranda Doyle had been featured on the cover of Pacific Business Journal as Executive of the Year, credited with building Catalyst into a major regional player through strategic vision and operational excellence. The article mentioned their success in identifying and capitalizing on competitor weaknesses, but it didn't speculate about the source of their competitive intelligence. I felt a satisfaction reading that article that I'd never experienced during my years at Apex. I was finally being recognized for my contributions, even if the recognition was indirect and anonymous. My expertise was generating millions of dollars in revenue and creating significant competitive advantages. I was being compensated appropriately for my knowledge and treated as a valued consultant rather than a disposable resource. But the real satisfaction came from watching Tristan's professional destruction unfold in real time. Apex's financial situation had become critical. They'd lost nearly 40% of their customer base in 6 months, and their remaining clients were negotiating more aggressively for better terms and lower prices. The company's credit rating had been downgraded, making it difficult to secure operating capital or invest in new technology. Several key employees had been laid off, and others were actively searching for new positions. Tristan had hired a crisis management consultant who recommended a complete rebranding effort, including a new company name, updated logo, and revised marketing strategy. The rebranding consumed resources that could have been used for customer retention or service improvement, but it gave Tristan something to focus on besides his failing leadership. The irony was that none of his strategies could address the real problem. He was fighting a war he didn't understand, against an enemy he couldn't identify, using weapons that were ineffective against the actual threat. Every decision he made was based on incomplete information, and every strategy he implemented was countered by intelligence that I provided to his competitors. It was like watching someone try to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing, except that I was the one who'd taken the pieces and given them to someone else. The end came sooner than I'd expected, triggered by an event that I'd anticipated but hadn't fully planned for. Consolidated Dynamics, the client whose demo had started this entire chain of events, announced that they were terminating their contract with Apex and moving their business to Catalyst Partners. The announcement came via a formal letter delivered to Tristan's office on a Tuesday morning, copied to the board of directors and key stakeholders. The letter was professionally written, but devastating in its implications. Consolidated Dynamics cited concerns about service reliability, competitive pricing considerations, and strategic alignment with long-term technology goals. They thanked Apex for 8 years of service but indicated that their business needs had evolved beyond what Apex could provide. What made the letter particularly damaging was its timing and specificity. Consolidated Dynamics had been Apex's largest client, representing nearly 25% of total revenue. Their defection would create an immediate cash flow crisis that would be difficult to survive. More importantly, their departure would signal to other clients that Apex was no longer a viable provider, potentially triggering additional defections. According to Craig, who called me within hours of the announcement, Tristan's reaction was swift and dramatic. He immediately convened an emergency board meeting, fired the head of customer success, and announced a comprehensive operational review that would examine every aspect of the company's performance. "He's completely lost it," Craig told me, his voice strained with stress. "He's convinced that someone deliberately sabotaged the Consolidated Dynamics relationship. He's talking about hiring private investigators, conducting surveillance, and pursuing legal action against former employees. The threat of investigation should have concerned me, but I'd been preparing for this possibility for months. My communication with Catalyst had been conducted through encrypted channels that would be nearly impossible to trace. My financial arrangements were structured through cryptocurrency transactions that provided multiple layers of anonymity. Most importantly, I'd never left any direct evidence of my involvement in the intelligence sharing. But Tristan's paranoia was becoming a liability for everyone around him. His accusations and threats were creating a toxic work environment that was driving away the remaining talented employees. His focus on finding internal enemies was preventing him from addressing the external competitive threats that were destroying his business. The board of directors had apparently reached similar conclusions. According to industry sources, they'd hired an executive search firm to identify potential replacement candidates for the CEO position. The search was being conducted discreetly, but word had leaked to industry publications and financial analysts. Tristan's response to the board's lack of confidence was to double down on his conspiracy theories and accusatory behavior. He hired a private security firm to conduct comprehensive background investigations of all current and former employees with access to sensitive information. The investigations included financial audits, communication monitoring, and interviews with personal contacts. I learned about the investigation when Craig called to warn me that I might be contacted by investigators. He'd been interviewed the previous day and asked specific questions about my technical capabilities, my access to customer data, and my relationship with competitors. They asked me if I thought you were capable of stealing customer information. Craig said. I told them that you were technically capable, but that I didn't believe you would do something like that. But Melissa, they're really focused on you. They seem to think you're involved somehow. The investigation was both flattering and amusing. Tristan had finally figured out that I was the source of his problems, but he couldn't prove it. The investigators would find no evidence of wrongdoing because I'd been careful to avoid leaving traces. They might suspect me, but suspicion wasn't evidence, and evidence was what they needed to take legal action. More importantly, the investigation was consuming resources and attention that should have been focused on business recovery. Every hour Tristan spent pursuing phantom enemies was an hour he wasn't spending on customer retention, service improvement, or strategic planning. His obsession with finding me was accelerating his company's decline. The final blow came from an unexpected direction. TechCrunch published an article titled The Rise and Fall of Apex Corp, a case study in leadership failure. The article examined Apex's rapid decline from market leader to potential bankruptcy, focusing on executive decision-making and organizational culture. The article was devastating in its analysis. It described Tristan as a charismatic leader whose presentation skills masked fundamental deficiencies in technical understanding and operational management. It documented the failed Synergy Mesh launch, the customer defections, and the internal paranoia that had characterized the company's final months. Most damaging was the article's conclusion. Apex Corp's failure represents a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing style over substance in technology leadership. When companies value presentation skills more than technical competence, they create vulnerabilities that competitors can exploit with devastating effectiveness. The article didn't mention me by name, but it described the departure of key technical personnel as a contributing factor to the company's decline. It noted that companies often underestimate the importance of institutional knowledge and the risks associated with losing experienced employees who understand critical systems. Reading the article felt like watching my professional obituary being written, except that I was the one who'd orchestrated the events being described. The journalist had crafted a narrative that was both accurate and incomplete, true in its facts but missing the crucial detail of my active involvement in the company's destruction. The TechCrunch article was picked up by other industry publications, creating a cascade of negative coverage that made Apex's situation impossible to ignore. Potential customers began canceling meetings. Existing clients started demanding contract modifications, and investors began distancing themselves from the company. The board of directors acted within a week of the article's publication. They announced that Tristan Ward had decided to pursue other opportunities and would be leaving the company immediately. An interim CEO would be appointed while they searched for permanent leadership, and the company would be implementing significant operational changes to address customer concerns. Tristan's departure was handled with the kind of corporate diplomacy that made firing sound like a career opportunity. The press release thanked him for his vision and leadership during a period of significant market change and wished him continued success in his future endeavors. There was no mention of customer defections, financial losses, or internal investigations. But the damage was irreversible. Apex had lost too many customers, too much credibility, and too much operational capability to recover. The interim CEO spent 3 months trying to stabilize the situation before the board voted to sell the company's remaining assets to a private equity firm. The sale was structured as an asset acquisition rather than a merger, meaning that most employees would be terminated and the Apex brand would be discontinued. I learned about the sale through the same industry publications that had documented the company's decline. The final article was shorter and less dramatic than the others, just a brief notice that Apex Corp had ceased operations and that its customer relationships had been transitioned to other providers. There was no mention of the 15 years of history that had been erased, the dozens of employees who'd lost their jobs, or the millions of dollars in value that had been destroyed. Tristan Ward disappeared from the industry entirely. His LinkedIn profile was deleted, his speaking engagements were canceled, and his professional associations quietly removed his name from their membership directories. He'd become a cautionary tale. a reminder of what happened when incompetent leaders were given responsibility for complex organizations. I never found out what happened to him personally. Part of me was curious about how he'd processed his professional destruction, whether he'd learned anything from the experience, or if he'd simply moved on to destroy some other company. But pursuing that curiosity would have required breaking my carefully maintained anonymity. And I wasn't willing to take that risk. My relationship with Catalyst Partners evolved as Apex collapsed. What had started as a simple intelligence sharing arrangement had become a comprehensive consulting relationship that generated significant income and professional satisfaction. Miranda Doyle had recognized the value of my expertise and had begun involving me in strategic planning discussions and competitive analysis projects. The consulting work was conducted entirely through secure channels, maintaining my anonymity while allowing me to contribute to Catalyst's continued growth. I provided market analysis, technical assessments, and strategic recommendations that helped them expand into new markets and develop innovative service offerings. It was the kind of work I'd always wanted to do, but had never been given the opportunity to perform at Apex. 6 months after Apex's closure, Catalyst Partners was acquired by a Fortune 500 technology company for $180 million. The acquisition was driven by Catalyst's strong market position in the Pacific Northwest and their reputation for innovative customer relationship management. Miranda Doyle became a senior vice president at the acquiring company, and several Catalyst employees received significant financial rewards from the sale. I received a bonus payment that represented a percentage of the acquisition value, along with an offer to continue consulting on competitive intelligence and market analysis projects. The offer was generous and appealing, but I declined. I'd achieved what I'd set out to accomplish, and it was time to move on to something new. I used the money from my consulting work to start my own small technology consulting firm, focusing on data security and system architecture for mid-sized companies. The work was challenging and rewarding, allowing me to use my technical skills without dealing with the political dynamics that had made my corporate career so frustrating. My new clients appreciated my expertise and treated me as a valued partner rather than a disposable resource. I worked on projects that interested me, set my own schedule, and earned more money than I'd ever made as a corporate employee. It was the kind of professional life I'd always imagined but never thought was possible. I never told anyone about my role in Apex's destruction. The secret was mine alone, a private satisfaction that I carried like a hidden treasure. Sometimes I would read industry articles about corporate failures or competitive intelligence, and I would smile at the incomplete understanding they demonstrated. The experts could analyze the symptoms, but they couldn't identify the true cause. The irony was that my revenge had been more successful than I'd ever imagined possible. I'd set out to punish Tristan Ward for his arrogance and incompetence, but I'd ended up destroying an entire company and launching a new career that exceeded my wildest expectations. What had started as an act of vengeance had become a masterclass in strategic thinking and execution. I never felt guilty about what I'd done. Apex Corp had been a poorly managed company that treated employees badly and delivered substandard service to customers. Tristan Ward had been an incompetent leader who'd prioritized his ego over operational excellence. Their destruction had been inevitable. I'd simply accelerated the timeline and ensured that I benefited from their downfall. The customer data that had started everything was eventually destroyed, wiped from secure servers and encrypted drives until no trace remained. I'd kept it longer than necessary, partly as insurance and partly as a reminder of what I'd accomplished. But holding onto it indefinitely would have been both risky and unnecessary. The information had served its purpose, and destroying it was the final step in closing that chapter of my life. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if Tristan had treated me with respect, if he'd listened to my technical concerns, or if he'd simply pronounced my name correctly during those first few months. Would I have remained a loyal employee, continuing to maintain their systems and protect their data? Would Apex still exist if he'd made different choices? The answer didn't matter. He'd made his choices, and I'd made mine. He'd chosen to be a narcissistic leader who valued presentation over competence, and I'd chosen to demonstrate the consequences of that approach. He'd fired me for being inconvenient, and I'd shown him what real inconvenience looked like. The most satisfying part of the entire experience was that no one would ever know the complete story. Industry analysts would study Apex's failure for years, developing theories about competitive dynamics, market forces, and leadership effectiveness. Business schools would use it as a case study in corporate decline. Consultants would cite it as an example of what not to do in competitive situations. But none of them would understand that the real story was much simpler and more personal. A competent employee had been treated badly by an incompetent boss, and she'd decided to do something about it. The rest was just execution. I closed my laptop and looked out the window of my home office, watching the Seattle skyline change as new construction continued to reshape the city. Somewhere out there, other employees were dealing with incompetent managers, other technical experts were being undervalued by their organizations, and other people were learning that loyalty wasn't always reciprocated. Some of them would accept their treatment and move on. Others would fight back through legal channels or professional networks. And a few, perhaps, would realize that the most effective revenge was the kind that left no fingerprints but changed everything. The ghost in the machine had moved on, but the machine would never be the same.